All right.
Hey, look at that. It took me forever, but I did it. Thank you so much, everybody, for being patient, especially Dan, our guest today. We're going to do episode 197 on operational cyber resilience. Dan is an awesome guest for talking about that. We'll introduce him in a moment. I'm going to count back from 5, 4, 3, silent 2, silent 1, and then we will kick it off as we do. Here we go. 5, 4, 3.
So, Kip, what are we going to talk about today in episode 197 of the Cyber Risk Management Podcast?
Today, we've got Dan Bowden. He's the global business CISO with Marsh McLennan. And we've invited him here because what we're going to talk about today is third-party risk management and resilience. And
That's
as we
important.
were getting ready to go live, Dan's like, "Yeah, speaking of, we got a doozy going on today that just popped out. So we might mention that. But generally, what we want to do today is explore what happens when critical services go down, and when that happens, what do your vendors actually owe you, and how some new regulations we think are going to change the game. So that's our subject today.
Excellent. Well, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Third-party risk is, I don't know, I don't want to say that it has overtaken in importance, everything else, but it does feel like it still doesn't get the attention that it deserves. So, look, every single organization I talk to deals with this, whether they know it or not.
Yeah.
It's frightening when they don't fully understand it. We're
Yeah.
just all so dependent on cloud services and SaaS applications that when they fail, oftentimes people don't know what to do. We fail too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like going through a blackout, right? When the power fails, you're like, I guess I just got to wait for the power to come back on.
Yep.
And of course, artificial intelligence is the shiny new thing, right? So everybody's like super interested in that. And
Right.
third
But
party risk.
it's just more SaaS, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in many respects, it is. But I think Dan's the perfect person to help us understand this landscape. So, Dan, thank you. Welcome to the show. Now, would you please tell our listeners about a little bit about you and your role at Marsh McLennan?
Well, thanks a lot, Kip. I'm hoping to live up to being pretty good. I wasn't sure about perfect, but I'll try to pick it up a little bit if I can. Marsh McLennan, we're a global company, risk advisory and insurance brokerage, career investments, reinsurance, management consulting, about 90,000 colleagues, 130-ish countries, and no, just have a really good time. Been there almost 4 years now, and really enjoy it.
That's an enormous scope of responsibility, both in terms of headcount as well as geographical spread. What a complex environment. Okay, that's why I think you're the perfect person to talk to about this, right? You're the right guy in the right place at the right time. All right, let's start with a big question that I think a lot of CISOs lay awake night thinking about this. But what happens when you've got a critical third-party service and it goes down? I mean, I got to imagine that you guys have things like that, right?
Yeah, especially when you're a global company and you work in a lot of different markets and countries, it happens frequently. It's
Mm,
you're not actually wondering, if something's going to happen. You're sort of just waiting for when. And depending on the nature of business in a given country, it can be different suppliers can have different impact. And there's some of the global ones that maybe we use everywhere. Everyone uses Microsoft, and so
yeah.
if
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft were to be disruptive, that's a global event. But sometimes we have other suppliers that deliver a very particular application for us, and so it's important to note that. And kind of on the Microsoft example, people remember going without Microsoft the day that there was a CrowdStrike software update, right? That ran afoul and knocked down a lot of Microsoft customers. And so
Mhm.
it can be something that happens frequently, and you just got to find ways to be prepared for it.
Hmm. Yeah, so CrowdStrike happened over a year ago already, which is kind of
Wow.
hard to believe, but definitely. And then right after or right around the time that the CrowdStrike thing happened, there was another distributed denial of service attack that happened a little bit later, right, Jake?
Yeah, I mean, there was Azure and the Microsoft 365 outage on July 30th. It was totally separate, as far as we know, from the CrowdStrike fault. Um, and that second one, hit a lot of organizations hard because you're kind of, I mean, at this point, it's kind of embarrassing not to be on Microsoft 365 or Google Workspaces, which actually that might be the duopoly right there. I don't
Mhm.
know if there is a third that I can reasonably think of that a serious business would use. You're either a Microsoft shop or a Google shop, which I mean, right there, that's a lot of risk, right? There's two options. Um, and you know, when when one I guess AWS and is another example. A lot of the internet lives on and operates on AWS. So between these three large cloud companies, if anything happens to them, it's like a mandatory non-optional holiday for
Mm-hmm.
everyone, and that is, I don't know if people have fully internalized that in terms of third-party risk. Um,
Well, they
I
don't go
mean,
down that
Dan,
often, right? I mean, that's
they
one of the
don't,
reasons why
but
people I don't think are, I mean, ordinary business leaders are probably not laying awake thinking about it at night like
no.
like a
But
CISO is.
but here's the thing, right? Isn't this a little bit ironic? Didn't we invent the internet, DARPANET, precisely to be incredibly multiply redundant in order to survive nuclear attack, and everything could just
Yeah,
route around, the new radioactive craters.
right.
And the whole point was resilience.
Survivability. Yeah.
Haven't we if in some ways undone that by basically relying on three companies to provide our services and the entire, basically, the infrastructure? So Dan, does anyone have good backup plans, or are we just like,
Well,
nope, guess we're just done for the day?
well, it's interesting, right? When it was your own data center, it was right there in front of you. All these natural thoughts occurred. If there was a thunderstorm coming in, remember back in the days, you think about that. Yeah, something that
Or a
simple.
hurricane if you were
We,
in the
yeah, we
Hurricane.
area.
we we take everything for granted now. It's in the cloud. It never goes down until it does. And I think that backup plans and business resilience plans are the smart companies are trying to figure out how to show they can. We lose it, we still have a way to maintain business. Either we can recover quickly, or we know how to do this manually. And that's where they've got to go. It's hard to do that.
Yeah, definitely. I I visited India one time. I was there for a couple of weeks, and one of the things that really shocked me about how they do infrastructure in India is you have these little, or at least what I saw was a little enclave where there was like a company that was doing business process outsourcing for, Western companies or something like that. And they would build their facilities wherever, right? But the infrastructure around the facility wasn't generally good enough to give them 24/7 power, right? And so they actually have their own miniature power plants in the form of diesel generators or whatever right there in their compound. And and wow, like my eyes were really opened when I went there, because of course I'm a spoiled American, and I rarely deal with power outages because we've got a relatively good electrical grid here. It's got issues, but and so cloud computing sometimes makes me think about that, right? That we've gone from having our own power generation capabilities, and now we're just relying on, the
Yeah.
big cloud in the sky to, provide us with all this compute. And I remember when people talked about how cloud was going to be like utility computing or something like that. Anyway, so does that resonate with you, Dan? I mean, or do you kind of think of it in the same way?
Well, it comes down to managing the agreement and the service, right? Did you read the contract? Did people actually do the math and understand the impact when there's some kind of an outage? And do you run things like tabletop exercises to understand what will happen and what's this really costing us? And I think that when people actually go through that exercise, that we don't have the SaaS service or whatever it is, it takes doing that to actually wrap your head around what is this going to cost, and then what does the agreement with that SaaS provider say, and are you even able to negotiate and do anything about it? Because if it's a monster size SaaS company and you're a medium sized business, you're a little fish in a big pond. They're telling you what service you're going to get. And so
Yeah,
if
or you can go
if
to
you're
the
in
other
that
place.
situation, you're going to have to plan accordingly.
Yeah, right. And I think that's another thing that CISOs really struggle with, especially ones that maybe have been around a little bit longer, is when you've outsourced something, you can't control it directly anymore, right? Like you can when it's on-prem. You've got to go through contracts to do that. And so for people, especially if you've come up through the systems organization, that can seem weird. And it's like, well, yeah, there's nothing I can do, which isn't true, but it's just a different way of managing risk. For me, that was something that I had to learn and navigate when I was a CISO. What about you, Dan? Did you have to go through that, or was that just not as difficult of a transition for you?
I think I'm older than you guys, so I think it was more difficult for me, right? And kind of the old infrastructure. I knew how the data center was put together, and I knew how everything was connected, and could guess, when the weather changed, if there was going to be a problem. And now I think it is just different. You're paying, millions of dollars for SaaS providers to have something up, and when it's down, you need to know, what do I have any recourse, and how long will it take, and is there a guarantee? And often I think we find out that the payback, or what that SaaS provider owes you, isn't going to be commensurate with your losses in some cases, and so you're going to have to figure out how to take care of things yourself, how to resume business, how to keep making money without that service if you have to.
Well, and I mean, to put it into industry terms, an SLA is not business interruption insurance. Let's just state it that way, simply and straightforwardly. SLAs, service level agreements, these are legal issues, right? These are the things that I deal with, that I negotiate, that I help clients work through and figure out. And we speak in terms like 3 nines or 4 nines. What does that mean? 99.9% or 99.99%.
Sounds good on the surface, right?
It sounds good. Well, the funny thing is, each 9 matters a lot, right? There's actually a substantial difference between 99.9, 3 nines, and 99.99. There's a big difference in acceptable downtime. But you know what? Even if it was just 99% uptime, what you actually, what an SLA does typically is say, if we don't make it, then here's a service credit of some percentage. And when I say that an SLA is not business interruption insurance, I mean that in every sense, right? The cost savings, the size of the credit is, even if you're spending, it's going to be commensurate with your size, obviously, right? It is a percentage typically.
Of your spend on them.
And it may be 5 to 10%. It could be even higher, depending upon how badly you miss the target uptime, basically. But first of all, when does it happen, right? Uptime or unscheduled downtime. If let's just say you're a U.S. centered e-commerce company, downtime in the middle of the night, you might not ever notice, right? Downtime on Black Friday could destroy your business, right? So even it should, just from that example alone, it should be obvious that a simple SLA service credit is not sufficient. So Dan, is this all? What do you do?
Well, I think it's always good to try to, I would say, go read the contract, but sometimes there's only so much you can do, right? If you've got to use that provider, and I think about the Change Health incident
Yeah.
from spring of last year,
Yep.
Yeah.
right? It's in a way it's a captive network. Those companies that are connected either didn't have another option or didn't know about any other options. So all the time Change was down, their AR backed up, and so a lot of practices, health systems were without revenue coming in because of that one outage. And so I think that there's just so much contingency planning that needs to happen. That's the only thing that you can. There's not a silver bullet to make the problem go away. You've got to figure out how to be resilient and then deal with the problem. And that's where I think you're doing tabletop exercises, and those often are something you can get outside assistance from if you've got a good cyber insurance policy. Your broker will set those up for you, and you can tell them, I need to understand what happens if our biggest revenue pipeline goes down. What do we do? That's what we want to tabletop this time. But that's those are important things to do. And insurance is possible, but only covers. You need to know what it covers and what it doesn't cover. And like was mentioned, it may not pick up any revenue that you lose in the event of an outage.
Yeah, and I think CISOs really struggle with this as well, right? Like, and I see this all the time, where they're like only somewhat involved in the procurement of a cyber insurance policy, and then they often don't take the time to actually read the policy and integrate the services that come with that policy into their incident response plans. And so, and I kind of put it in the same bucket as well. This is like a contractual vehicle for managing cyber risk. But, a lot of us are like, yeah, that's just too weird. I'm just going to let somebody else deal with that, which is an awful reaction because, that's so much of the job now, I think, is about doing things through contracts. That's just the way things have gone. And certainly with AI, I think that's just going to exacerbate, the situation, because very few of us are going to run our own AI. And yet, it's really going to affect our risk profiles. Well, anyway, so the regulatory landscape is really starting to catch up with this reality. What are you seeing, Dan?
I actually used to be skeptical of different regulations that came out, that they were more of a CYA for the regulator in a compliance sense, where now it feels like they are becoming more driven towards good business resilience and cybersecurity resilience. And I observe what happens with the UK. There's a new operational resilience effort underway there, where they ask you to identify your important business systems, assure that you're doing adequate testing to understand impact if those were to go away. And then DORA, in the EU front is the same, and even now has reporting requirements. And so if your business is offline, you're going to be offline for 24 hours, or maybe you're downstream from a provider that you rely on. It's something that you've got to understand. How do you recover from it? And then you're required to report what happened, why it happened, and what you're going to try to do about it next time. So they are becoming, I think, more. I like the direction. It feels like it's becoming more aligned with business resilience, and not just necessarily a list of things to comply with because they seem like a good idea.
Right. Checkbox security.
Well,
Jake,
well,
are you
Kip,
helping anybody with the UK resilience requirements or DORA?
So first of all, I just wanted to spell it out. DORA is the Digital Operational Resilience Act. It just to make it clear for folks, it's in the EU.
Swiper, no swiping.
Swiper, no swiping. That's exactly what I think every single time I hear someone say DORA, which is probably not what they intended. As Dan said, DORA is comprehensive. I don't know how effective it will be. I just read a really interesting article, or really a white paper, honestly, on we don't really even have a good framework for measuring the effectiveness of GDPR, and people are already talking about a simplification of it. I think that in some ways the EU is experiencing the pain caused by its, in my opinion, over-regulation. Total opinion of my own, just to be clear.
Okay.
But and the economic consequences of that. But it does seem premature to declare GDPR or any of these other frameworks, and there have been quite a few: Digital Markets Act, Digital Services Act, DORA, the obviously GDPR, e-privacy directive, which is supposed to become the e-privacy regulation, but it hasn't happened yet for almost a decade at this point. So, I think that while these things are important and can help, in the U.S., what do we have? We have we have CERCIA, and I'm not even going to try to remember what that stands for, but it's something about critical infrastructure reporting, cyber risk, interruptions.
We did do a 2-part episode.
We did. I can never remember what CERCIA stands for.
Or even exactly how to say it. That was part of the episode. How do we say this thing?
But so Dan, what about in the U.S.? I mean, Kip and I are well on record as just loving NIST, both the 1.1 cybersecurity framework and the 2.0. What are you seeing, here in the U.S. with, because these aren't, NIST is never, no one's going to mistake NIST. I should say the NIST framework, because I actually hate it when people just say, "Are you compliant with NIST?" Well, that makes no sense. NIST is an agency; it does lots of stuff, right? They usually mean in context, they usually means the cybersecurity framework, but they're not laws. They're not even regulations or rules. I suppose you could call them best practices. Maybe even elevate them above best practice to some degree, but they're no DORA.
Right. Yeah, it's a good point. And I think what it is, it's a good step for organizations to get into, where it prompts for identifying who your key suppliers are, doing risk assessments, understanding what kind of supply chain management opportunities that you have. So I think it's improved a lot. The challenge for everyone, especially if you're in a large organization, is you may have hundreds or thousands of suppliers, and so there will always be that initial, whatever the new benchmark is that you're trying to use to manage your vendors and suppliers. How do you get from zero, get the first one in through number 100 or 1000, and then do it in a timely enough basis that you're doing good, consistent follow-ups, which then drives you to have to prioritize who are the most important ones. Let's do those first, and maybe those are done annually, and maybe the others are done at onboarding and contract renewal. And you're having to make some decisions like that.
God, doesn't it just seem horribly inefficient the way that we are trying to make this work? First of all, it really doesn't make any sense to expect every customer to perform their own audits of a business, right? In some ways, I know we want responsibility, and those things are important, but people ask me all the time, "Oh, do we really need to include these audit clauses?" Because frankly, we're never going to use them. We're never going to audit anybody, and they're just being honest and pragmatic about it. And of course, the difficulty is that the second anything bad happens, it's like, well, did you do an audit? Well, no, I didn't. Well, then why did you have it in there? And we're facing a real practicality problem with third-party risk management, and it's very, very current to talk about TPRM and having a third-party risk management program, but what does it actually do? And I think this point is huge. Kip, you and I have a mutual client, and that mutual client's like, the best I can do is basically send the same kind of Excel-based questionnaire and get them back, which is also ridiculous, because now you have, in order to do business, as a vendor, you're like, why do I have to fill out the basically one of like 3, and there's really not that many more that are all that common versions of this crazy long questionnaire for every customer.
Yeah.
And no one is
Yeah.
even really, I mean, are they even looking at it? Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
I've
this whole
both-
area is a mess.
I've both sent those questionnaires out on behalf of customers. I've responded to questionnaires being sent out on behalf of customers.
I mean, I know that the
Mhm.
by the way, if you guys didn't know this, your astrological sign has probably shifted. I used to be a Gemini, but it turns out that these signs based on when you were born over the last 2,000 years, the stars have literally moved. They've shifted. So apparently now I'm a Taurus, which anyway, why does this matter? It's because I feel I live that Gemini two-face concept, right? I will switch between the vendor and the buyer on a dime because that's my job and I have to do that. But it's hard not to feel ridiculous at times because I see, like you were saying, Kip, we see both sides of this coin, and it's just not efficient. And I don't know that it's really.
But it's a struggle because, like, I rack my brains. I'm like, there's got to be a better way. I haven't come up with one. But Dan, please give us your perspective on
this. Say
you're hoping I have you're hoping I have the silver bullet.
Everybody wants you to have the silver bullet.
I mean, Dan, that's why you were invited as a guest. If you don't have the answer,
I said I was shooting for pretty good, right? So
yeah, that's true.
And this is a tough one to even hit pretty good at, but. The end of the day, right? And I agree with everything you said about the questionnaires. And I'm in the same boat in what look in both directions on answering and asking. But I think at the end of the day, it's about demonstrating to our customer this is resilience. This is how we continue business. This is what you'll expect. If you can project what they should expect when you're having an issue, I think that's a great thing for a customer to understand, but it's hard to get from organizations. Tell me what happens when your service is offline. All we generally ask them is, tell me you're never going to be offline, right? That's what we want to hear, but it would be good, I think, in the future to have the conversation. Okay, let's pretend, maybe you're going to say there's a 1 in a million chance you go down, but if it goes down, what's it like? Tell me what would you propose I do? What measures should I take to protect my business while you're down? And I think that's something that we should try to graduate to as well on the resilient side.
Now, I'm going to just go way off script for a second. At least I think I'm going to go way off script. I haven't scrolled all the way down. Now, Marsh is one of the largest insurance brokers, unless I'm confused.
You got it.
And I guess, and this is hypothetical really, but do you think maybe a better solution long term is for each company to just buy its own, basically its own third-party resiliency business interruption type insurance policy that can then and your premium is going to be based upon each, underwriters are good at this stuff, right? Underwriters have all the data, or they will get all the data, and maybe they can look at your third party risk and your all of your software, all the SaaS, all the cloud, and actually come up with something that is reasonable here. Because we try to get, think about just a little cute little project management. For a while there were so many of them, right? Settled down a little bit, but just think back to the day when there were just dozens and dozens of these little project management SaaS companies out there, right? Every company was surviving without these things for centuries, if you want to go back far enough. So you could look at them and say, well, that's not a business critical infrastructure type of program there. So the the underwriter might look at that and be like, if it goes down, you ought to still be able to keep going.
Mhm.
But like, aside from kind of going through almost case by case, I don't know how else to do it. And there's this concept that I'm not sure we actually mentioned about cascading and cascade failures. That little, I mean, think of it too, like that little SaaS, project management company itself is running on infrastructure as a service or platform as a service, and it is not difficult to build up a 7-layer dip of cascade failure possibility here. And I just think, based on this, like, SLAs are not the answer, right? Unless maybe the SLA is at the back end. But even then, think about what happened with CrowdStrike, right? If everyone, first of all, their contracts were protective of them in most cases,
Mhm.
but if you're a big kind of back end infrastructure company and you go completely offline, like, arguably not even the Microsoft, Googles, and Amazons could pay out the amount of money that to really reimburse, right? Like,
No,
it's the
Mhm.
amount of money
it's
is
it's uninsurable.
it's
The exposure.
uninsurable, right?
Yeah.
It's not possible. And I mean, I guess we might, I hate to say this, but the concept of utility might need to be used, because, like, if you think about it, when the power goes out, you don't get to sue the power company for power outage and your business loss, do you? As far as I know, you don't. And I know part of me is like, if I'm a big infrastructure as a service company, I might be pushing for that. I don't know. What do you think? I mean, I just totally
No, I think you asked the question. I think you also answered it, but that's the truth, right? Is how do you insure it? Because let's just say you even wanted to try to have it insured. I'm sure someone could put some quantify monetary numbers associated with an outage, but then a good underwriter or broker is going to want to understand, well, where do you get all of your underlying abilities to provide that service?
Mm.
Because when you go to you go to the hospital and you've fallen and broken your arm, but you get that little question the insurer wants to ask: did somebody do this to you? Was this
Did it
somebody
happen on the
else's
job?
fault? Right?
yeah.
It did, and it's a really simple analogy, but I think in these cases it's going to be the same thing. Well, before we pay all of your losses, we want to know whose fault this was,
Yeah.
and you're going to get in this circular cycle of lawsuits that may never get uncooked.
One of my favorite.
Like Delta. What was it? Was it Delta, Microsoft, CrowdStrike? All
Yes,
kind
there
of
was.
doing the
Yep. Yep.
Spider-Man meme pointing thing,
Yes. Yes.
and so that's I think that's the challenge with it. But
And one of my favorite legal words, subrogation, is
That's
what
the word I was trying to remember.
is what happens all the time.
Yes.
I mean, that's an insurance industry
Yeah.
specific
Yeah,
term.
it's kind of a
And
reinsurance for them, right? A little
well, no,
tactical
it's not. No,
reinsurance in a
reinsurance
way.
is different.
Well, no.
Reinsurance,
I know it is, but it's just like reinsurance
yeah.
is how other people give you, the insurance company, money back on claims you've paid. And subrogation, that's another form of an insurance company getting money from somebody else for claims that they've paid, right?
Yeah,
Isn't it?
usually it's insurance company A getting money from insurance company B,
Right.
and that's
Right.
that's
But we're just
essentially what
moving
that
money
is.
around, trying to make our
Well,
loss ratios look good.
so we are right. No, that's actually really important, Kim. Is we are just moving money around, and I think to some degree, um, we're going to hit this point where, I was just thinking to myself, um, I've lost power way more often and for much longer than I lose any specific SaaS platform, right?
Mm-hmm.
Realistically,
Mm-hmm.
at least where I live. We had that big giant storm early, I guess it was, yeah, almost the beginning of 2025 here in the Seattle area. We had no power for almost a week. And I've never known, and I mean, even think of the biggest, downtime, when that makes the news, it's never that long. I don't even know if I can remember anything big being down for a full day. Usually it's a couple hours. And I just, this is such an interesting, timely, and intractable problem. This whole concept of third-party risk management, third-party risk allocation, insurance. I mean, I think that, like, right now, I think there are some best practices, Dan. And do you agree that it kind of starts with your procurement team? If you're a big enough enterprise to have a procurement team, you got to get legal involved. You've got to understand that every standard SaaS contract in particular doesn't really provide adequate protection. It is worth understanding the difference between infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service, and then whatever else people want to sell you as a service these days.
And then also the function that it's performing. Is it helping with sales? Is it helping with order fulfillment, right?
Well, and scrolling back up to a section of our pseudo script that I think I want to,
it's a pseudo script for you, pal.
Yeah. Well, and just to ask Dan, I think one thing that I don't want to let's not let ourselves off the hook. The purchasers of these services, and you've got there's a really good point here, which is, rather than just willy-nilly outsource and buy and have all this, just creating all this massive TPRM, maybe, start with your critical business processes and figure that out. What do you say? What is your advice, Dan, on that front? Yes, the contract is important. Yes, SLAs can be useful in insurance matters, but what about going back to the kind of the basics of, like, what are your
governance is a really big deal. Just who oversees procurement of whatever, everything from staplers to software as a service, and I think if we establish an effective governance where everyone understands these are our expectations and standards all the way through, it also will capture those shadow IT, people paying for different services with the corporate credit card, things like that, where you're now funneling everything through a highly effective governance process. Then you can actually have conversations about contractual obligations, things that you might call a restrictive clause in a contract. You can capture all of those, and establish standards for, if you want to have liability, discussions or limits. But that's I think that where it starts is just getting at that effective governance and telling everybody there's one way to buy things here, one way to acquire things here. And then you've got all the way from whoever's in charge of sourcing all the way down to the security and tech teams on standardization and cybersecurity.
Yeah, and is there any real substitute for going through each, for identifying your critical business processes, and then for each dependency asking yourself, what happens if this fails? How long can we survive without it? What is our backup plan? I mean, is there any? I mean, isn't that? I guess that's part of internal risk management, right? I mean, I honestly don't think you can do third-party risk management without doing that first.
No, and if you can't do it for real in a test, you've got to pretend, So and some teams have figured this out, like payroll goes down. Well, the CFO is going to say, well, going to call the bank and say, cut all the same paychecks we did last time, and there's going to be some some level of error in there. And maybe some things that were missed, but at least your team is going to stay and work through whatever the problem is while it's happening, even though the payroll system may be off for an extended period. But that's a simple scenario to describe. But email, some companies only communicate with their clients over email. Do you have your client's phone number? Are you able? Because some of us don't keep phone numbers anywhere anymore. Our mobile phone, and if we don't have our clients' numbers there, how do you get a hold of them? And it's those simple conversations. How will you do even the simple things If email's offline, you know, etc., what do you do? But you have
Right.
to actually test it.
Yeah.
Well, this has been an awesome conversation. We are coming up on time. Dan, as we wrap up here, we've covered so much, but is there anything that you wanted to say, or do you have any final thoughts for any of our listeners who are struggling with this challenge of third-party risk management? Any final thoughts?
And not to let anyone off the hook, but this is hard for everyone, you know. And I think that the key thing is to identify those, even if you just identify, if you have 100 vendors, but you know which 5 are the most important, start with them. Put them on the radar with your leadership. Let them know we're administering some standards for review and expectations. And whenever we replace one of these, the new vendor is going to be subject to a higher bar, and then start to build on it based on risk. If you find out, well, 5 wasn't enough, we actually have 10 highly risky vendors, add those and move so that you know what those critical business functions are and what supports them. Because some people forget, and they forget that, you know, maybe in healthcare, you know, it's really interesting working there. There are things that affect, you know, it may not seem like an important system, but maybe it affects patient safety. Or maybe there's a security system that you're like, oh, well, it fails open. Well, no, actually, it fails closed and locks down all of the medication cabinets.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
and so I think that people need to like play that out in your mind. You know, if that fails and we can't get to medications, is that a big deal? You know, and
I mean, according
is.
to you know, medical TV dramas where they start taking crowbars to those medication dispensing machines,
Did you
I
guys
imagine
watch the same episode that I didn't see?
It is a problem.
Yeah, and so that's the thing is start at this stuff that you know is a challenge, and then start asking questions. Well, what
Yeah.
if and what if? That's where people start. But
So Dan, the way that I would characterize what you said, I don't disagree, but I want people to understand that you're saying top down, right? You're saying start at the top, figure out what's most important, and then dive into the details. Because I think our legacy as a profession is to do everything from the bottom up, is to start with the ones and zeros and then go up. And that just doesn't. It makes less sense to do that as every day goes by, especially in this world of contract, of trying to manage cyber risk through contracts. Well, thank you, Dan, for being here. Really appreciate it. And I'm going to wrap up this episode of the Cyber Risk Management Podcast by summarizing that today we explored third-party risk management and resilience with our friend Dan Bowden from the Marsh McLennan organization. We learned about the realities of vendor outages, what actually is in those SaaS contracts and what's not. We've looked at some new regulations and how those are actually changing expectations around operational resilience in a way that we were kind of concerned maybe it wouldn't. Dan, thanks for being here.
thank you guys. Great talking to you today.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Take care.
Don't leave, Dan.
Yeah, don't leave yet.